Time for the top things shop owners are worried about here at the 2022 Tops Industry Conference. Number one's got to be their allocation. Okay, a lot of these guys rely on this product at least for a steady stream of cash flow. Obviously, many sell singles, some sell product in break form, some sell it in a mixture of different ways, but it is a primary revenue and more recently even a profit source for a lot of these people. And so they're concerned about their allocations because now we see Fanatics taking over, and they obviously have a pretty strong history of changing the game when it comes to distribution, and they tend to focus on being an e-commerce site. Tend to focus the vast majority on that themselves. And so what I think is probably going to happen is we are going to see the distributors squeezed out, maybe not 100%, but on a larger segment of the products that'll be sold directly through Fanatics website. And if you're a hobby shop owner, I think you're going to still have a pretty consistent access to products because it is a critical source for that. Whether or not your allocation will be the same or better or more, or what the price point, I think that's the next discussion. Is hobby shops, I think, are always going to be cut in, but at what margin? Are you going to be able to buy $50, $58 top series 1 boxes and sell them for $110, $115, $200? Or is the margins going to shrink? The price on a top series 1 from a wholesale, a direct level goes up to $80, $90, $100. And if Fanatics is selling that product on their own website at $110, $115, it's certainly going to hurt your ability to obviously charge more for a product like that. So I think the number one thing shop owners are worried about here at the 2022 Tops Industry Summit is probably their allocations, on how that the number of allocations, the number of each of these products that they're going to get on a consistent basis on each release. But also they're a little concerned about if they get a count direct through Fanatics or if they're primarily through a distributor, how that relationship will change and evolve in the coming months. We'll certainly be here to monitor it. So the number two thing that hobby shops are worried about here at the industry summit is competition. And so you can tell that obviously with allocations kind of tight, allocations obviously being spread out against a wider and wider group of not only hobby shop owners, but breakers and hobby shop owners that are breakers. There's obviously only so much product to go around. And obviously with supply chain issues and all those types of things, it can get rather competitive for these products. And so I think competition is a big one. And there was a lot of discussion about how, maybe there's too many hobby shops, or maybe there's too many, or it's too easy for a new hobby shop to gain a little bit of allocation. Maybe not a whole lot, but they gain a little bit. And that certainly has existing hobby shops a little concerned as well. You also have, many in this industry that have been around for a long period of time. And we talked about on our previous video where Josh Luber was talking a lot about data and the customer and gathering that data and having this in a database or having this in some kind of computer software program. Look, there's guys in this room that are not going to be capable of doing that. And he basically implied that if that's not something that you're willing to pivot to, or at least have a conversation about, well, you might not be that great of a partner for Fanatics. So I actually think that if that is the direction that they go, the more younger, the more tech savvy, the more integrated hobby shop breaker that has all this data, that's willing to work with Fanatics closely on that and drive them a lot of customer data and then maybe potentially receive from them, well, those are probably the shops that are going to have the best relationship. And so it's not necessarily going to be your tenure in this industry. It's not necessarily going to be how many years you've been open, your previous allocation. It might be that what you bring new to the table, and that often happens in businesses that get disrupted. And when we see change like we're seeing here with change of ownership and all the different changes, well, it's the people that innovate and change along with it tend to be the most successful. So the next things that have hobby shop owners at least concerned here to a certain degree is, are the good times going to keep rolling? And obviously, as most of you guys know, the hobby has experienced tremendous growth, not only from the sales of the cards reaching record levels, but obviously there's a lot of profit to be made when something like that happens. And so there's some people doing a lot better here than maybe they were 3 or 4 years ago. I tell you what I sensed is the guys that have been in the game for a long time, 10 years, 15 15 years, they're not really that concerned if values continue to go down because they've actually experienced the cycles. They've seen stuff go up, they've seen it go back down, they've seen it go back up, quite frankly. Whereas actually it's the guys that have just gotten in more recently, maybe the last 2 or 3 years, that have really only seen values go up and appreciate and kind of the business be really super good. Those are the ones that are a little more concerned. That's what I feel. That's what I sense is as those people are a little more concerned about, how big is the drop? How big is the drawdown going to be? Is this going to go, essentially back to where it was maybe 4 or 5, 6 years ago from a demand perspective, from a pricing perspective? I still think hobby still actually has some ways to grow. One of the things that we talked about is it's really interesting what's going on in Upper Deck. We could have our own video on that. We could kind of dive into that subject, but apparently they're backed up on their releases. They're not really soliciting a lot of new releases. And so some people are speculating that, maybe that company is trying to clean itself up and sell itself. Maybe they're having, financial difficulties, which would force it, maybe kind of force its hand on some kind of sale of the company. Those are obviously speculative. And obviously with the supply chain issues that we've got going on with making cards, no company has been immune to it. And certainly Upper Deck is in a challenging spot in that sense right now. And so, but my whole point with Upper Deck is, boy, if something like we can get the combination of Fanatics with Upper Deck, I still think we're going to see one more of these companies combined. And I actually think the one that makes the most sense to Fanatics is actually Upper Deck. You wouldn't even need Panini at that point because you'd have SP Authentic, SPX, you'd have all these fantastic brands, Exquisite, obviously, on the basketball side. And not to mention, you'd have Tiger Woods potentially, and obviously, contract willing, but then you'd have, someone like Michael Jordan maybe put into new basketball sets, which obviously LeBron James as well. And that to me would re-accelerate the excitement in the hobby. If you were to see, I think it's, first of all, maybe beggars can't be choosy, but it's awesome that we have Fanatics, I think, combined with Topps. That's just my opinion. That's how I feel about it. But I think if we could roll in Upper Deck as well, I mean, we'd have like a dream team and a lot of excitement, especially among basketball collectors. And for those of you that don't collect basketball, it might not mean a lot to you, but we did see over the last 2 or 3 years that a lot of the excitement comes in through the basketball market. And then those guys pivot to football cards, baseball cards, soccer cards, F1 cards. It's almost like the NBA card is kind of the gateway drug. And so if Topps and Fanatics and maybe potentially Upper Deck, I mean, we can all dream, right? If those can combine, then obviously that would create a dream scenario for basketball collectors. And I think it could help drive demand into the future. But the newer dealers are a little more concerned, I think, than the ones that have seen the market cycles. And I'd probably be somewhere in the middle of that. I'd probably be a little bit more concerned than the 10, 15-year veteran based on what Josh Luber described as kind of a newer partnership with hobby shops. And they'll certainly be rolling out the details of that in the next 30 to 90 days. But it looks like they want a more tech-savvy and data-centric kind of hobby shop to deal with them. And a lot of these older guys really aren't there. And so maybe they get passed by a little bit. But the new guy, I don't think it needs to be as concerned. The market is still really healthy, and it's not necessarily from a secondary market card perspective, but just in terms of the demand that we're seeing, it's still a healthy market, and we'll see how it plays out. So I think the last thing that dealers are worried about is maybe they're comfortable that they'll get some form of allocation, likely through some kind of direct account with Fanatics, and maybe to a certain degree, to a lesser degree, I think through a distributor in the future. They're comfortable they'll be there, but I think what they're worried about, and maybe most worried about, quite frankly, is the margin. Okay, obviously the last couple of years we've seen a lot in margin expansion. Okay, you could go to Walmart and buy a $20 blaster and sell it for 40 or 50, and obviously that is not really present in a lot of industries. It is present more in collectible type stuff, luxury type items, but it is not necessarily something that we could be seeing sustained over a long period of time, although some might argue sneakers and certainly certain designer brands have been coming out with products where you can buy it at retail, and to a certain degree it's worth more on the secondary market. The time we're in right now, we're seeing it with like used cars. We're seeing it with like everything. The value of everything is really inflating very quickly, and so that obviously can expand your margins in something like trading cards. And so I think the concern is, if you have a direct account through Fanatics or some way to get this product, is the margin going to start to shrink? And that certainly has some people concerned, because obviously you scale up your business to a certain degree, expecting certain kind of sales and profit off of that scale. And if all of a sudden the margins contract, we see this all the time with like public companies and stocks where their margin ends up contracting. And while their sales growth and their sales tend to still hold up, but your margin contracts, and then that can really throw a business into a lot of cash flow problems. And so we'll see how the industry evolves there. I would bet that the margin is going to shrink. In fact, I would anticipate that if I was a hobby shop owner, and the ones that I've been talking to, I've been recommending maybe go off into some parallel industries. We just saw Mojo Break launch their most recent website, which is kind of a gaming breaking product, and they're certainly doing some different things there. I think Rich Layton is doing kind of the similar thing where they're breaking gaming product. I think there's other opportunities there, not necessarily if you're already selling packs. I would look for something that is completely different. And then when we look at these distributors, there's products like board games, there's the other types of games, there's toys. That is a completely separate revenue model for you. And in my opinion, that could be a great addition to what you already have going on. And look, if the margins stay good in sports cards, well, it'll just be icing on the cake.